Good morning. Today I'd like to talk about how to display only portions of the records that you might have in a particular table. Here I have a whole bunch of students in my student table, and you can see I have about 20 of these students with their name and email and etc. But it's quite a bit of information to display on one page. So thankfully there's a nice way of converting this into a paginated display so that we can display only a few records at a time, say 5 per page, and then allow us some controls to switch between pages. So to do that, there's a plugin that used to be built into Rails called Will-Paginate, and now it's taken out of that and put into a gem. So first of all, we have to install the gem into our general gem system so that it's available across all of the projects that we might be working on. So to do that, we type the command gem install, and then the name of the gem is called Mislav, which is the author of this particular gem, Will_Paginate. So that's the entire name, Mislav-Will-Paginate. And we want to get this specifically from a particular location in the gems.github.com site. So we can tell the gem installer to go and get this pagination plugin gem actually from the a particular website. And that is called gems.github.com. Once we run that, it will install everything we need into our system and make it available to other Ruby programs that we might have. The problem is, however, that the Rails project itself does not know about this gem. So one of the ways to allow your project to know about this is to configure that in the file environment.rb. This is in the config folder, and it's called environment.rb. And if we add some text here to tell Rails to configure this particular gem, we say config.gem and the name of the gem itself, Mislav-Will_Paginate, which is exactly the one we just installed. And here we can also pass it the version number that we want to run with, because these versions change quite a bit. That's the nature of open source software. And then we tell it the source where to go get that data from. This lib tells Rails where to find this particular gem, this particular method that we're going to be running in our views. Once we do that, we can save our files. We want to make sure that we stop Rails. First of all, we need to stop our project, and then we can restart it because we've made a change to the configuration, the environment itself. So let's go back to our students page, and we can see everything is still working the way it was. Pagination is not being called yet, and so let's talk about what pagination really is in the Rails context. You should all now be familiar with the model view controller concept of a Rails project. A request comes in from the URL from a browser directly to your Rails project, and from that you're actually accessing a URL with some particular form variables that might be, or query string variables that might be in the URL itself. That information comes into the routes system built into Rails, which breaks all of that up and creates a parameter hash and calls a particular action in our controller. So all of that information from the URL, this is from the user, gets passed through the routes into the controller itself. Now the controller has the main operation of directing traffic, getting database information, and passing information back onto the view. So from here, typically we use find methods, which go into our model and select various rows from our database. And in this case, we're selecting various students and and their IDs and some other information, and that information gets sent back to the controller, which then populates an instance variable called pages or students. In this case, let's call this one students. And this variable then is a collection of all of the records that I have selected from the model, and that gets passed on to the view controller. Now the view then takes this information and lays out in loops using embedded Ruby commands. It lays it out into a table or into various divs in HTML, populating it with the actual data that it got from the model. All of that gets fully rendered as a page that gets sent back to the user that requested it. So we've made a full loop around the model view controller. So let's look at this in how we would really want this to work in a pagination. If we have a URL, then we can pass some form variables or some query string variables that might tell us which page of data that we might want to display. So if I take that and I say /students, if this was the URL, the question mark delineates the action and the views that are going to be displayed with the actual query string parameter. So in this case, page is a variable that gets assigned the value 3, and that gets passed through the routing system, which actually then converts it into the params hash with one element of that being called page, and that is equivalent to 3. So if I say params bracket :page bracket, then that will actually result in the value of 3 because that came from the request. And the action is also populated by the route system, and it's going to call the index page, the index action for this particular student controller. So then the controller then makes a call and says, I only want to select a certain subset of all of these records in the database. So through a pagination call, we can say, don't give me all of the database records, give me only a certain portion. So I might start, if I'm saying I'm going to display 5 per page, for instance, I might want to say, in this case, so passing a value of 3, I would select the third set of records. So 1 through 5 might be the first page, 6 through 10 might be the second page, 11 through 15 would be the third page of records that it would select from the table directly. So only 5 records are selected in this model and sent back to the controller, which once again populates our students instance variable with only those 5 records. So that collection is significantly smaller, and I've made a smaller database query, so there's less information going back to the database. The view then takes whatever collection I've given it, and I don't really have to change too much in my view to display those next 5, other than adding some information to control some pagination. Say I want to have a little, perhaps a little menu system that would say display page 1 and then page 2 and page 3, etc. That all then gets rendered fully out to the initial requester through the browser. So let's start adding some code here. The first thing, let's look at the index controller, the index action in the student controller. And currently we have this set. This is just set up as the default. I'm populating my instance variable of students, which the view will utilize later, and I'm finding all of the records that are in that table. And this is where I need to say only find a smaller portion of that information. So instead, the pagination gem provides us a new method called Paginate. And I can pass it some nice information like the page that I want to paginate. Say I can say 3. And I can also pass some information about how many I want to pass. And I might as well pass an order and I want to order it by the name, so I can pass the name value here as the field name that I want to sort all of my records by. So this will make a call to the pagination method and populate the same variable that my view is going to use later. So let's go ahead and save that and see what happens now. If I reload this page, now I'm only getting 5 records, which is just exactly what I wanted, but it didn't give me any other information. I only have 5, and it looks like it's in the middle of my set. And why is that? That's because when I created which page, I said, give me page 3. So the pagination gem takes the page and multiplies it, actually takes the page minus 1 and multiplies it by the number of records per page, and that comes back with 10. So 2 times 10 would give me, starting on the 10th record, and give me another 5 values. So in this case it gave me the right information, but that's not very useful because the user can't see any of the other values. So instead of hard coding the 3, let's pass, we already know that query string information can come and gets populated into the params hash. And so let's say that we create a variable called page, and we pass that into the URL into this controller. This way the page value will be passed to the pagination method and give us a different set of records. So let's try that, see what happens. Now I'm getting the first values. You see I start with Amaya, Callista, Cameron, Erlene. And remember that I can pass a query string and say I want to get page 2 now. You can see that my names have changed. I've now gotten the next 5 set of records from my table. So I can do this for as long as I have pages, which works pretty well. So passing a variable number here would populate into my controller and give me a different value here for every time that I call it. So that's great. Let's go and try to actually add some pagination controls to the view. So to do that, let's go look at where our students are being displayed, and that would be in the view folder, students folder, because that's my model, and the index.html.erb file, which is what we're displaying here. And so you can see that this is going through a simple loop through all of the students instance variable that was created by the controller, by the index action in the student controller. So I'm displaying various fields from that record, and then each one is displayed in a separate table row here. So there is some code that we can add some more information that the pagination method provides us. The pagination gem provides us this Will-Paginate method that we pass it our collection of students. And then we can pass this page entries info, which also takes the students collection and an entry name of student, and you'll see what that displays here. So this will render with the equal sign some more HTML that is automatically created for us by the gem. So let's save that. Go and reload our page. And now we have some previous 1, 2, 3, 4 and next buttons. And down here it says displaying, this is the paginate information line. It takes the value that I passed, it says displaying students 11 through 15 of 20 in total. So it calculates all that for us, puts it in a nice sentence, and lets us have controls to go forward and backward. If I hit previous, you see that I was on page 3, and the page 2 now is populated in the query string. If I hover over the top of these, you see that each page down here in this area here, you'll see that each page changes when I hover over the top. So the value of the query string that I'm going to use changes every time. So the next gives me the next block. It unhighlights the page that I'm on, so I can't reselect that. I can then only go back, and it handles all of those edge cases for me, so I don't have to worry about if I've gone too far backwards. It no longer lets me click on the previous button. So that's pretty nice. So let's change that. It's kind of a boring looking. We can change that HTML in the view directly, and let's change this to some information that would let us style it a little better. So I can have a div and an internal div where this is the information about which students I'm going to be displaying, like this sentence displaying 11 through students 11 through 15 of 20. That's this line here. And then I'm going to have another line which is my actual pagination controls. So let's save that and see what it looks like. Now, not much different, but it gives us the div and HTML structure that would allow us to style this a little better. So let's go and add some style information. And I have some pre-done here that is similar to Flickr's style. So all of the CSS is stored in the public folder, just like a normal web root system would be. And let's look at our class models.css. This is being included in all of our views. And so let's just add some CSS that will make this look a little nicer. I won't go through that. This is all fairly standard assignment of colors and padding and font colors and things like that into the divs that we've created for it. So let's go reload our students. And now it looks like we've centered it. I have now little hover information, changes color, so I have nice little boxes to click on. And it shows me 3 in red because that's no longer clickable. Previous and next also work just as well. So that's just fantastic. That's really cool. Let's now talk about where some of this model information should be. If we go back to our controller, our student's controller, this has a lot of information in here, and we try to keep the controllers skinny and our models fat, so that most of the business logic and everything goes into the model itself rather than cluttering up our controller. So one way to do that would be to create a new method that would incorporate some of this information for me. So I can create a new method called Pageit, and let's pass it. I still need to give it the value that comes into my controller from the URL. So this is still the value that I want to display which page. Now we can look at our model itself, our student model, and we can create a class method, and a class method begins with self, and call it Pageit. And let's call our local variable here page number. So now we have our little method here, and let's add some logic that does basically the same thing that we had before, but let's call the method in this logic here inside of the model itself. So first I'm going to pass the page. I'm going to call the original paginate method that the Will-Paginate gem gave us, and I'm going to pass it the same information, the page, the number that I want per page, and how I want to order these records. That should be it. And let's save our data. And let's go look at what we have. Make sure that everything still works. Looks like I can do previous and next, and everything works fine. And if we trace the information again now, the data comes into our students controller. And now we're just passing this Paginate method that I created, which is a class variable called by calling the class instead of an instance or an object itself, which is why I use a capital S. I'm calling the class called student and the class method called Paginate. I'm passing one variable here called that I got from the query string into the model. The model then goes and does the selection for me, returning the values that it got from the database of only that slice of the database. And once again, that student controller gets filled in with the instance variable students, which my view utilizes in a loop to display that collection, and my pagination code is here to go forward and backward. Just one more view of that to show where my URL comes in through the routes, populates my page parameter, which I now can then pass completely into the model. The model does the pagination and retrieves a small subset, populates my instance variable into my view, which iterates through them using embedded Ruby and renders the text out to the browser. That just about covers it. A very nice little gem that I think you can make use of in your own projects. Thank you for joining me today, and I wish you happy Rails.